Timothy J. Schwab of the God Culture has a theory about the rivers from Eden mentioned in Genesis 2. He says the Pison, Gihon, Hiddekel, and Euphrates rivers are deep sea ocean trenches. As a result of the flood, they were covered up by the newly formed world ocean and now remain hidden. Before the flood, they were a mega river system that watered the whole earth. Is this true? Let's take a look at the evidence he offers in his book Solomon's Treasure. Along the way, I will offer some insights from his video, but I will primarily be sticking to his book, which he claims is the monumental case for the Philippines no one can disprove. Here is a map of Tim's system which can be found in his annotated Book of Jubilees. Because this chapter is so long and involves a lot of intricacies, I am going to focus on several key errors that bring this theory crashing down. The long and short of it is the rivers from Eden cannot be rivers formed by snow melt and rain because there was no rain until the flood and also no ocean. There are actually 5 rivers and not 4. The main river starts in Eden, which Tim claims is the North Pole, flows down the middle of the Atlantic and breaks off into 4 branches. As with all of his other theories, Tim's case rests on wrong etymology, wrong Bible interpretation, assumptions, and a lack of understanding the source material he is appropriating. In this case, that is the map showing what the earth would look like if the oceans were drained and the nature of ocean trenches and ridges. The Mid-Atlantic Ridge. From Solomon's Treasure, page 274. The river from Eden initiates in the North Pole, which we identify as Eden, not to be confused with the Garden of Eden planted in the east, which we will cover in detail later. The river, then, operates continually across the earth down between the Americas and Europe, then under Africa into the Indian Ocean and all the way under Australia into the Pacific Ocean until it reaches the coast of Mexico. Therefore, these must be downhill in slope, which is a challenge for other theories. As the source river for the other 4 mega rivers, scientifically, it must essentially be larger in volume than the other 4 branches which flow from it, and that concurs. It has an average depth of 2.5 kilometers, 1.55 miles, and an average width of 100 kilometers, 62.5 miles. This is massive. From Solomon's Treasure, page 273. The Mid-Atlantic Ridge does not begin at the North Pole. It is in fact a boundary line for the North American and Eurasian tectonic plates. The ridge actually runs through the Arctic Ocean, becoming the Gakkel Ridge, the Laptevsky Ridge, finally connecting with the Chersky Range in Siberia. This fact alone destroys Tim's entire case, which rests on his assumption that the Mid-Atlantic Ridge is a sunken river with the headwaters in the North Pole. This ridge also runs through Iceland and is a popular tourist destination. That is not an ancient riverbed, it's the meeting of 2 continents. Now, it's true you can go swimming in a part of the ridge called the Silfra Fissure, but that water originates in snow and not any underwater fountain. Silfra is spring-fed by groundwater originating as meltwater from Langjökull, Iceland's second largest glacier, about 50 kilometers north of the Thingvallavatn Lake. Did Tim even bother to research the path of the Mid-Atlantic Ridge? It goes through Siberia and continues until it meets the Philippine Plate and then it diverges. Here is a map of all the tectonic plates showing just that. Pison River. From Solomon's Treasure, page 275. In chapter 5 on Havilah, land of Eve, we found that the Philippines leads the world in these 3 resources which define it as ancient Havilah gold, pearl and the onyx stone. To date, it maintains a leadership position in all 3 as it is the historic forerunner in gold abundance, has no rival in largest pearls on earth, and possesses the strongest onyx and marble from Romblon. Therefore, the Pison River must surround this whole land of the Philippines. You can observe the culmination of the 65,000-kilometer mid-ocean ridge off the coast of Mexico essentially. At that point begins a series of oceanic trenches which travel all the way up the coast of America to Alaska, then, over to Russia, down to Japan, and splits and surrounds the whole land of the Philippines especially. This is the ancient Pison River, the first river from Eden that branches from the main source river. It is positioned at the end of the entire Eden River system, yet it is ranked first. This is because Hebrew writing initiates from right to left or east to west in direction. Therefore, the easternmost river would be first. Solomon's Treasure, page 275. The Pison River is listed first because it's the last in the Eden River system and the easternmost river because Hebrew is read right to left or east to west in direction. That is pretty ridiculous. I don't think even Origen could squeeze that out of the text, and he was a master at the allegorical technique. But there is more hilarity to come. From Solomon's Treasure, pages 276 and 277. The map to the adjacent top left identifies numerous trenches by name name which were linked prior to the flood as one river. Science, unaware, labels these by many names, but they constituted one continuous river in antiquity. Solomon's Treasure, pages 276 and 277. Here is a clear map of the ocean trenches surrounding the Philippines. What proof does Tim offer that these trenches were once all connected? He says that some trenches were filled in with sediment. From Solomon's Treasure, page 275. Understand, however, some of the areas of these trench systems have been filled in places due to sediment from modern rivers dumping into them over the continental shelves and some from the flood. Therefore, they may not all still appear contiguous but once were and still there. A few trenches are partially filled with sediments derived from the bordering continents. Trenches that are partially infilled are known as troughs, and sometimes they are completely buried and lack bathymetric expression. Solomon's Treasure, page 275. What proof does Tim give that all the trenches surrounding the Philippines were once connected and now filled with sediment? None. Not a single shred of proof, just an assumption. Did he research the trenches that surround the Philippines? Immediately to the north of the Philippine Trench is the East Luzon Trench. They are separated, with their continuity interrupted and displaced, by Benham Plateau on the Philippine Sea Plate. The Philippine and East Luzon trenches are separated by Benham Rise, which is an extinct volcano ridge and home to the world's largest caldera, the Apalaki caldera. It looks like this. The trenches surrounding the Philippines are not currently connected and by all accounts never were connected. Tim makes the assumption they were but offers no proof except his previous statement that some trenches are now filled with sediment. The status of the Philippine Trench and the East Luzon Trench being interrupted and displaced by Benham Rise proves that his theory is wrong. Jihan River, from Solomon's Treasure, page 278. Genesis 2:13 KJV, and the name of the second river is Jihan. The same is it that compasseth the whole land of Ethiopia. Compasseth, Hebrew, kabab, to turn, turn about or around or aside or back or towards, go about or around, surround, encircle, change direction. We are seeking a river that surrounds all of Ethiopia, as compasseth means surrounds or encircles essentially. Genesis then says the whole land, which affirms the meaning. The challenge with this is most in modern times do not know where Ethiopia was considered when the Bible was written. They are confused by modern Ethiopia being named such because in history until the 1800s, it was always identified as Abyssinia. Their name is appropriate as they were part of ancient Ethiopia but a very small sliver. In order to understand where this river is located, we must understand this because there is no modern river surrounding the whole land of modern Ethiopia, Abyssinia. Solomon's Treasure, page 278. As you can see in the definition Tim gives, the word translated does not only mean surround or encircle. Modern translations reflect this. Niv, the name of the second river is the Jihan. It winds through the entire land of Cush. Berean Study Bible, the name of the second river is Jihan. It winds through the whole land of Cush. CSB, the name of the second river is Jihan, which flows through the entire land of Cush. HCSB, the name of the second river is Jihan, which flows through the entire land of Cush. Tim goes on to prove that historically Africa has been called Ethiopia. Therefore the Jihan River must surround the entire continent of Africa. From Solomon's Treasure, page 280. Even as late as 1611, when the King James was first published, those translators did not see Ethiopia as any less than all of Central Africa from east to west coast. Therefore, if this third Jihan River from Eden must surround the whole land of ancient Ethiopia, then it must surround the entire continent of Africa. It is not a tributary running through it, and even the Nile does not fit, especially since its source is rainfall, which did not exist in Genesis 2 in verse 5. It must surround the whole land, which places it on the bottom of the ocean floor. We have never seen a coherent theory on this one in the slightest. However, connecting to the mid-ocean ridge leads to a trench system which just so happens to surround the whole land of Africa or ancient Ethiopia. Later in this chapter, we provide a map of this as well as the trenches and basins that surround Africa so you can visualize. Solomon's Treasure, page 280. According to Tim, the Jihan River looks like this. The problem here is that the picture Tim has drawn, that the African continental shelf is the banks of a river, does not match reality. Here is a map of the Atlantic Ocean ocean floor. Tim does not offer any more about the Jihan River surrounding Africa by pointing out the trenches of which it is supposedly composed. As can be seen from this map, there are no ocean trenches surrounding Africa. I guess they are covered in sediment. 3. Hidakal River. From Solomon's Treasure, page 282. The third river once again is accompanied by a description that one cannot ignore, yet they do. In fact, they even replace the Hebrew word on this one with a modern river, the Tigris. That is erroneous. Genesis 2:14 KJV. And the name of the third river is Hidakal. That is it, which goeth toward the east of Assyria. East of Assyria means east of Assyria. That seems simplistic, yet the traditional theory on this is far from reading the Bible. For one, there are some translations which insert the Tigris River spuriously and it misleads many. The logic almost seems reasonable. However, it is a complete misrepresentation of occult origin. Solomon's Treasure, page 282. Tim offers two proofs in this section that the Hidakal is not the Tigris as the Septuagint says. The second one is that Daniel mentions he had a vision while standing near the Hidakal. I thoroughly dismantled that argument in an article which can be read here. The other argument is etymological. From Solomon's Treasure, pages 284 and 285. First, before consulting Daniel, who never lived on the Tigris River and never mentions the Tigris by its Hebrew name for obvious reason, we should consult a lost tribe of the northern kingdom, as they were taken to Nineveh and surrounding areas right by the Tigris River, which Daniel never lived. In the book of Tobit, he literally comes out in Tobit 6:1 and identifies the Tigris River as Tigris. In Hebrew, that is not Hidakal. However, there is a Hebrew name for the Tigris. 1 Kings 14:15 KJV. For the Lord shall smite Israel, as a reed is shaken in the water, and he shall root up Israel out of this good land, which he gave to their fathers, and shall scatter them beyond the river, because they have made their groves, provoking the Lord to anger. Isaiah 7:20 KJV. In the same day shall the Lord shave with a razor that is hired, namely, by them beyond the river, by the king of Assyria, the head, and the hair of the feet, and it shall also consume the beard. The lost tribes of the northern kingdom were taken captive into Assyria beyond the Tigris River. The southern kingdom was later taken to Babylon, which is on the Euphrates River, mostly especially the palace where Daniel lived on or near. The river in Hebrew is the Tigris River. Why? It is to the Hebrews the river of abomination, where the occult was birthed, as their legends begin there at Babel. There is a Hebrew word Euphrates used several times, but the Tigris is only referred to as the river in Hebrew, mentioned 26 times or so in scripture, usually referring to northern lost tribes. Judea, from which Daniel originates, never lived in Assyria. Here is a list of the mentions of the Hebrew name for Tigris as the river in the King James Version 26 times for your consumption. Ha-Neha, the river. 2 Chronicles 9:26. 1 Kings 14:15. Edra 4:10. 4:11. 4:16. 4:17. 4:20. 4:23. 5:3. 5. 6. 6. 6. 6. 8. 6:13. 7:21. 7:25. 8:36. Nehemiah 2. 7. 2. 9. 3. 7. Isaiah 7:20. 8. 7. 11:15. 19. 5. 23. 3. 27. 12. And Jeremiah 2:18. Solomon's Treasure, pages 284 and 285. Tim's argument is that the Hebrew name for the Hidakal is not the same as the word for Tigris. It is Ha-Neha, the river. First of all, the reference to Tobit comes from Sephari.org. At the link it can be seen that this edition of Tobit is from 1878. It can be found at the web archive. Reading the introduction spills a lot of light on this text. We publish the Hebrew text from the first edition printed at Constantinople in 1516, which Sebastian Munster reproduced in 1542, and which is hence usually but wrongly called the Munster text, as if he had been the first who published it. Further research reveals that Munster translated Tobit into Hebrew from Greek. Sebastian Munster, originally trained in biblical languages as a Franciscan friar and later a leading Protestant, took one of them, retranslated it into Latin, and simultaneously created a new Hebrew version as a veritable recreation of the Hebrew text that had been lost. Even further research shows that two very old texts of Tobit in Hebrew, one of which dates back to the 11th century, were published in 1897. This text, which the translator refers to as HL, has the word Hidakal in Tobit 6:1. Tim did not even bother to research the Hebrew text used by Sephariah. He did not think to check its origin. If he had, he would have learned that it is a relatively new text translated from the Greek. That makes it worthless for his purpose of proving that the Tigris and Hidakal are not the same river. The 11th century Hebrew text does retain the word Hidakal and gives more weight to its identity being the Tigris. In Tim's next etymological foray, we are to believe that the proper Hebrew name for the Tigris was the river. He says this word is Haneha. However, if you go search that out, you will find the word Haneha is used many times, not just in reference to the Tigris. For example, Genesis 15:18. In the same day the Lord made a covenant with Abram, saying, Unto thy seed have I given this land, from the river of Mistr unto the great river, the river Euphrates. Haneha simply means the river, Euphrates River. From Solomon's Treasure, pages 289 and 290. Finally, the last river is the Euphrates or Perat in Hebrew, but it cannot be the modern Euphrates which originates in rain and snow melt. It would have to flow backwards to work, and there is no river from Eden feeding it nor connecting it to the three other branches at the same time. None of the narrative makes sense. However, we find the fourth and final branch of the mid-ocean Ridge River from Eden next to South America running up its coast map on bottom right. Oddly, Perat is rendered in Tagalog as well, meaning salty and with the fountains of the great deep within. This whole system is salty. This is the fourth position where the mid-ocean ridge veers into another leg, exactly 4 and a perfect balance conforming to every detail of Genesis 2. You will find no other theory which does. Solomon's Treasure, pages 289 and 290. By process of elimination, Tim concludes that the Perat, Euphrates River, is an ocean trench off the coast of South America. Do I really need to rebut this? Perat is translated Euphrates 19 times in the Bible and always means the river running through Iraq and not an ocean trench off the coast of South America. So now there are two Euphrates? How did that happen? Tim does not say. He's not finished though. Solomon's Treasure, page 289. One thing we find extremely interesting is that the Filipino word Tagalog breaks down as Tagar and Ilog, meaning people of the river, yet we do not find a significant modern river in the whole Philippines that would define the inhabitants of the thousands of islands. No common denominator found in modern times. Should they not be referenced as the people of the ocean instead? Here we have yet another clue that reveals this theory, as they are the people of the river, the Pisan River from Eden. Now it makes sense and no surprise in the land of Havilah. Solomon's Treasure, page 289. For as much as Timothy J. Schwab loves the Philippines, one would think he would know that the Tagalogs are one people group among many and they all hail from Luzon. The word Tagalog is believed to have been derived from either one or both sets of contractions, Tagar Ilog and or Tagar Alag. The prefix Taga means coming from or originating from, referring to a place of birth or residence. The word Ilog means river. The word Alag means a shallow place in a stream where people could wade to cross to the other side. The first word Tagar Ilog is the version in the explanation of the name of the Tagalog that they were river people. The second word Tagar Alag is related to the first concept and was first articulated by H.O. Beer, who said that the ancient Tagalogs were people of the lowland areas where the Alag was found. The Tagalog culture was essentially a river and water-based culture. Fishing and agriculture were predominant means of livelihood. Most of the ancient cultural centers of the Tagalog regions were founded on river banks, specifically near the delta and the war or the mouth of the river, where the river meets the sea. Riverine communities, especially those by the delta and river mouth, became centers of trade and commerce. In pre-Hispanic Philippines, some of these trade centers were Manila, Tondo, Sapa, Pasig through the Pasig River, Talim, Bay, Pila, Lambang through the Laguna de Bai, Balayondo Pansipit River, Lipar and Tal through Bonbon or Tal Lake. That is enough for Tim's book. Now I want to show you how inconsistent he is. In his worldview there was no ocean before the flood, only these 5 rivers which are now ocean trenches. Listen to what he says in his answers in Enoch series. One of them coming from the west pours its waters into the Great Sea. Now, Enoch is also identifying the Pisan River here. How do we know? Well, look at it. It flows from the coast of the Americas west to Asia, and the Great Sea here is the Pacific Ocean. That is the greatest or largest of oceans today. Then we have 2 more rivers. 2 and 3 we'll label tell them. Verse 6. And these two come from the north to the sea and pour their waters into the Erythraean Sea. We know that is the Indian Ocean in all of history, no doubt. And especially in this book of Enoch, we've already covered that. How can the Pison River be flowing into the Pacific Ocean when Tim teaches elsewhere there were no oceans until after the flood? How can what is now an ocean trench be emptying itself into a body of water that lies above it? That does not make any sense. Not to mention, he teaches Cain might have walked all the way to Mexico from the Philippines. From the Mystery of Cain Part 1, Answers in Jubilees 20. He could have settled anywhere in the Pacific, perhaps founding maybe even the fabled Lemuria, which is a Nephilim kingdom, because the Nephilim took it over, which is no surprise because Cain's lineage did in fact mate with Nephilim, well, with angels to create and procreate the Nephilim. But we find it far more likely he traveled even further east to higher ground. Why? Well, Cain would have known that the earth was going to be flooded. See, Adam knew this prophecy according to several accounts. We actually do cover that. We are not going to go into detail on this because this is an educated guess and no more, because no one has found the road sign yet saying Cain lived here, just hasn't happened. If you follow the 10th parallel to the east from the Philippines, specifically from the Garden of Eden area above ground through the Pacific, you end up in South Mexico. Well, that's odd because there is an ancient city there built on top of a more ancient city. No one really knows how old it is, so we don't have any data to prove it's exactly that old, and this is definitely Cain's. We are speculating in an educated manner here. Here's what we find odd though, and we've even heard Steve Quayle and others, I believe, mentioning this if I have that right. Tenochtitlan actually has the name of Cain's son, and that's right there in South Mexico. Enoch the magician, not the good one, and that just happens to fit Cain naming his first city after Enoch. Can you fully prove that out? Well, maybe you can, we cannot. Not right now, but it is an interesting thought. How would Cain have walked to Mexico if there was not a Pacific Ocean? He would not have been able to do so. Timothy J. Schwab cannot even keep up with his own system. This is the first in-depth look I have given to Tim's entire Rivers from Eden theory. None of his theory fits with the reality that those boundaries he claims are trenches are actually tectonic plates. In the case of trenches, they don't all connect. It's bad etymology, bad geography, and bad Bible interpretation like everything else he does. To quote the God culture, that's a rather extreme view, not one worth consideration. Yeah, bless. Tim loves to crow about no one being able to refute his theory, but I have done exactly that. He might ask me, so where are the rivers? The answer is I don't know. The Euphrates and Tigris are well documented. I am not going to speculate, nor do I need to. The problem is Tim thinks he can know everything, and that gets him to concoct extreme theories that he claims are eternal verities which he can't even keep up with, as we see in his Answers in Enoch video.